Welcome to the Kit Car History File series, where we'll be going through the industry's past. We'll be visiting old marques of long ago, some modern ones, some mostly older stuff. A lot of archive information with photographs and information on the cars they made, the people involved, and what happened to them. And we do these, just incidentally, we do these videos in association with Enwin Motors, Neil Winnington's channel. It's a collaborative affair. We both run our exclusive content, but you'll find some crossover there. But it's all, Neil's a bit of a whiz with videos and I'm not. So that's how we do it. Anyway, without further ado, we're going to come to once upon a time, a kit car company that was right up there at the top table of the industry until it wasn't. A company called NG Cars. And there's many cars out there, and even though that you probably haven't been able to buy one for a good number of years, you'll still see a nice collection of them at big kit car shows. And they really were first-class cars. Anyway, founded by a guy called Nick Green. We're going to we'll scoot through the history of the marque, and then we'll go through each of the various models. And it wasn't all traditional roadsters, although they became known for that, and quite rightly so. They weren't just about, well, certainly not in the early days. There's some, maybe some cars there, a couple of cars you didn't even know about. So, founded in 1979 as NCG Design, actually, as Nick's initials. He'd got gained a degree in mechanical and aeronautical engineering and design at Hatfield Polytechnic, which I think is now University of Hertfordshire, actually. And he was a big, he is a big enthusiast of the MGB, and was using one as his daily driver. And so it was logical that he'd build his car business around that donor, if you think about it. Generally a real car nut, I think. Talking to Nick over the years, obviously, about the origins of the company. And in general, in particular, rather, he was taken with the Marque SS, which at that time was selling in big numbers. It was designed by Julian Kingsford Booty of Lenham Sports Cars and sold by John Britton Garages in Barnet. And effectively, it was two halves. So you bolted the back and the front onto an MG to give you a period style replacement, shall we say, called the Marque SS. He was based in Lymington in Hampshire. And he don't think that he and his wife Linda could really believe at the time in the mid-80s, by the mid-80s, that they were shifting as many kits as they were. Most of the stuff was produced elsewhere, and they brought it all in and sent the kits from their factory in Lymington. But they really were very busy, as I said, and initially starting out with the NGTA, but we'll come to that in a minute. I'm jumping ahead of myself. Anyway, Nick carried on until the late 80s, and then he passed the projects on to, he started to sell the projects off. And an NG owner and club member, Peter Fellows, from the Rotherham area. He bought a TA kit in 1986, liked the project so much that he did a Victor Kiam, and he ended up buying the company. Well, initially he bought the TA, and he began trading as the TA Motor Company. I think Nick initially just couldn't cope with the amount of models that he'd created, and he needed to create a bit of space if he was ever to sort of develop the product range. And one had to give, and it was the TA. And in the end, as I said earlier, Fellows ended up taking over the whole kit caboodle, really, trading as Pastiche Cars. And that was, by that time, Nick had just wanted to move on to other things. And he went to do a postgraduate degree at Southampton University. And, of course, he also wanted to finally complete the NG sedan model that he'd started many years before and had never had the real sort of time available to do it because of just keeping up with business. At that time, MGBs were becoming slightly hard or harder to source as their classic appeal began to grow. And Fellows was never really a fan of them because he felt they were too expensive. So rightly or wrongly, he set about revising that range to accept full Sierra mechanicals, although you could use Cortina, of course, but Sierra primarily. And he, one by one, renamed all the models at the same time, which I think might have upset the purists slightly, but I can see possibly the reasoning behind it. But when you think of NG, I think you think of an MG donor. Anyway, Pastiche sadly crashed in 1991, and the range, or the bulk of it, went to GTM, run that time by Peter Beck and Paddy Fitch in Sutton Bonington in Leicestershire. And they did a lot. They re-engineered a few of the models back to how they were, I think, and tried to sort of repair the dent in the reputation of MG. But no too fine a point. I mean, Fellows had put his heart and soul into the business, so it wasn't for the fact that he wasn't trying. He did. He was very proactive at shows and stuff, and it was just unfortunate. I think it was around about the time when the country was having one of its regular recessions, I think. And it just didn't go to plan. GTM. It's not an obvious bedfellow for NG. They were known for producing two-seater sports cars in kit form. And I think speaking to Paddy in later years, he just saw himself as a temporary custodian for the products, because obviously he believed that it was a well-known kit car name and high quality one, and he just wanted to maintain it. And entering 1993, when things really did change for the better for NG, when another MGB and NG, you've got to be careful how you pronounce it, MG and NGs, enthusiast John Hoyle, based in the Epsom area of Surrey. He took over the reins with his wife Barbara and settled the ship, and his intentions were to restore NG to the pinnacle of the kit car industry once more. He in association with Nick, he referred to Nick a lot in the way he was setting up his company, NG Cars. And he felt that the model, he too felt that the model range had become slightly confused and maybe a bit diluted. And he immediately reverted back to MGB mechanicals. And he also dropped the TA model at the same time. And I think history undoubtedly tells us that John, ably assisted by his late wife Barbara, did a superb job of resurrecting the marque. And at the same time, he had developed, around about the same time, or just after he'd taken the marque over, John, being an MGB specialist, had developed a really clever and excellent MGB suspension conversion kit with Jerry Hawkridge, which was front and rear. Although you didn't have to take both at the same time. You could fit one first and then move to the other if you so wished. And John wanted to concentrate on that under the Hoyle Engineering banner, and so he sold the NG project to a guy called Derek Smith of a company called IGI in year 2000. And that operation had big plans. They were in the Hampshire area, probably quite near to where Green had originally set the company up some 20 years before. But once again, big ambitions, and sadly it came to naught. And NG Cars ceased trading in 2002, but it refused to lay down. And another NG enthusiast, a patent attorney, a really nice chap called Nigel Brooks, acquired the marque that same year. And he recognised the importance of the spares operation and the fact that the owners probably were struggling by that time to get much needed specific spares for the MG models. And so he concentrated initially on that, and he made a lot of those available, retooled some, and streamlined the range again. So in 2004, he even unveiled a brand new NG called the TS, although I'm not even sure that actually went into production. But certainly a couple of shows such as Exeter and Stoneleigh, he showed the prototype. It was wider, it was longer, and he'd seen what Caterham had done with the 7 SV, the wider, longer model, and thought that as a species we were getting bigger. And so therefore he gave people a little bit more room, or the intention was to give people more room within the the TS cockpit. And he showed the part built prototype as an idea design concept, November 2004 at Exeter. He traded as Findhorn Cars, and that was named after his favourite salmon fishing river in Moray in the northeast of Scotland. Once he got the spares established, he worked hard at kit sales and finishing cars for people, and generally promoting the marque. But as his day job as a patent attorney kept him incredibly busy, and ultimately decided that a full-time kit car manufacturer existence wasn't for him. Until very recently, I think Findhorn Cars still existed, and I think he could still supply. He may still be able to supply you with spares, although I'm not sure about new kits. But for the last 5 or 6 years, I don't think it's been possible to buy an NG. Now, as a very sort of regal and sedate traditional roadster range of cars, you might not associate them with the racetrack, but back in the day, in the mid-80s, a guy called Chris Alford, Alford, he had a brutal TCV8, or they called it TCR, and that was very successful and competitive on track in the 750 motor clubs. I think Formula Libra, the series where single-seaters like Formula 5000 and F1 and F2 all joined the track at the same time. I think that was kind of the kit car series back in its earliest days was very much I've heard some wags call it a wacky races series, and there certainly was some unlikely kit cars on track. JBA Falcon springs to mind. Dutton Rico, Tim Dutton used to race one of those, and of course there was an NG. But rather than perambulate round at the back of the track, I mean the TCR was right up at the sharp end. And then in later years, when John Hoyle had the marque, his late son Chris was very, very swift in a TCV8. But let's quickly go through the various models in the NG range. Nick's first car was actually after the first, I beg your pardon, sorry, I'm getting sidetracked here. Get something else. The NG Tycoon was the first model that Nick had made in his university days, actually. And he fitted a mid-mounted Rover V8 into a coupe style body, and that kind of led him onto the NG Speedwell Spectra, which was his Arkley inspired, although it was more of a modern style, but the concept was similar to the Arkleys. That was sold under the NCG banner, and was really before NG cars existed, and it probably preceded NG officially by a couple of years. And incidentally, Nick was actually an agent for John Britton Garage's Arkley SS, so that's kind of where that inspiration was, I think, amplified, shall we say. And at other times, he also, as well as NCG, he traded as a Speedwell Motor Company from his then, I think it was New Milton base. Anyway, so he came out with the Spectra, Speedwell Spectra, MG midget based. He called it a customization job on a standard car, and it saw the front bodywork ditched and replaced by a beefier GRP style made laminated flip front. And a good conversion by all accounts. At 12, I think he made about 10, 1,200 quid. It was quite expensive when you consider that the Arkley's new front end price was £360. But I think Nick used that as a stepping stone and soon moved on to creating NG cars. I do recall, actually, that the Spectra in 1985, I think, suddenly reappeared under the banner of Spectra Cars in May 1985 from a Northwest 9 London, Kingsbury district of London. And they suddenly relaunched it for about 6 months. It disappeared again. Anyway, we can then come to the NG sedan, the car that Nick had designed very early on, but had never really got around to finishing. But we might as well cover that here now. Once he'd sold the product range to Peter Fellows, he got back to the NG sedan in between his studies, I think his postgraduate degree. He was going to offer them in kit form, or the first 20 at least. But he was intending really it to be a fully built type approved vehicle. But sadly, other than the prototype, that was it. There was no more built, I don't think. It was based on Rover SD1, as Nick's traditional and beloved MG donors were, as I said, beginning to rise in value. It had a very, very pleasing on the eye, flowing fixed head body, underpinned by one of Nick's preferred cruciform type chassis in 100mm by 50mm steel. The prototype actually had a hand-rolled aluminium body, although again the intention was to go GRP for production versions. As well as the engine from the SD1, it also gave up its live rear axle, which was a a trailing arm affair with a Watts linkage for lateral location. He did announce fully built prices actually. Initially 21,000 for the plus VAT for the straight six. He offered the Rover straight six 2.6, and then 26,000 plus VAT for the full hit 3.5 litre V8 version. But Nick's, I think, studies and not really wanting to get into car manufacturing again when it all came down to it, I think that put the brakes on the sedan really. Although that wasn't really it, really, because all of a sudden, out the blue, while he was also working on the sedan, suddenly Nick appeared with in 1988 with a car. This is after he'd sold the TA, the TC, TD, TF, etc., etc. He came out with what was called the NG Tourer. He surprised everyone with that, and very much a traditional type NG, although it was a 2+2, decent size 2+2 as well, and it was more practical as a result. And it was notable as far as Nick was concerned for also being on Ford Sierra. And it had an all-new MIG-welded cruciform chassis with independent suspension all round, including the Sierra's solid mounted diff, double jointed half shafts and twin semi-trailing arms. Front suspension was a combination of upper rockers and wishbones. For whatever reason, the Tourer didn't catch on. Although it has to be said, in 2004, when Nigel Brooks was looking at doing the TS, he certainly revisited the Tourer in terms of its size and practicality. But let's look at the core models now. Let's start with the TA. Over 400 of those were made, inspired by the Aston Martin International, although it wasn't. Nick was clear that it was never intended to be a replica. And I guess it was the first traditional roadster style kit to appear on the market in the UK, along with the Marlin Roadster. And that was Paul was good for Paul Morehouse was good friends with Nick and Linda. And I know that he sold, when he announced it in 1980, it was 79, but when it came on stream in 1980, he sold 50 in about 11 months. When Pastiche took it over, they changed the name to the International. It was the Pastiche International. A revised Mark II came about in 1985, but it was Peter Fellows, in 1987 that took it over. After that, it settled back under the GTM Cars banner between 91 and 93, although they reverted to the TA name. But that was it really for the TA, sadly, because when John Hoyle took it over, he didn't proceed with it. Then we come to the NGTC. This was an Aston Martin Ulster inspired, with a pretty boat tail, complete with a pretty boat tail. Quite a milestone car really for NG and for the kit car industry really. It was a lithe roadster with sexy styling and pitch perfect in terms of its build quality, which Nick was well known, and carried on by John Hoyle, of course. Where the TA was inspired by the International, the TC lightly echoed the Aston Ulster. GTM took over the bulk of the NG range, obviously, as we've already said several times in 1990, and they carried on with that, but they retained or reinstated the MGB mechanicals of what was the pastiche Gladiator for a time. I'm not sure if it was GTM or Fellows, but there was a Morris Marina donor option for the TC for a short time too. 400 of them were made. And it went all the way through that model, basically all through the various custodians of the marque. Then we come to a derivative of the TC called initially under Nick Green it was the TCR, later under John Hoyle it was TCV8. Lower, shorter, and a chest-beating car, and a very capable car as well. I think, I should have asked John really, maybe 10, 12 of those were made over the years, but I'm not entirely certain on that. TD we come to next, and that was probably the least, in sales terms, least successful of the mainstream NG models. It's effectively a 2+2 of the TC, although as a result of the extra seating, it lost that distinctive and very pretty boat tail rear end. Again, Pastiche took that over, GTM followed, and then it again was available pretty much all through NG cars' existence. Probably about 100, I think, were sold of those. And then we come to the biggest selling NG of all, the TF. A very graceful car with long flowing wings, and that really caught the kit car buying public's imagination. And 1,200 of those were sold, and it was biggest selling by a long way. And just prior to selling to Pastiche, Nick had been working on a Ford Cortina Stroke Sierra based version of it that he called the Henley. While Pastiche renamed the original MGB based version the Ascot. It gets a bit confusing too, and I believe it was them that actually were going down the Marina Donor route with the TD and also with the TF. John Hoyle, when he took over, he soon introduced a Rover V8 powered version of the TF, and of course reverted to the TF name, which I feel is only right, really. And then we just go quickly touch again on the TS that Nigel Brooks introduced or was going to introduce. He based it on the Tourer, inspired by the Tourer. He felt to address the relative lack of cockpit width in the NG range. And he described it really as a TC with an extra 4 inches of room across the car, along the car. I think there may have been 2 of those made, a prototype and one other. I certainly saw when I visited Nigel, crikey, way back in 2002, 2003, probably 2004 actually thinking about it. I was aware that there was a 2 underbuild, another one along with the prototype. But anyway, that's our quick look at the NG cars, Mark. I hope you've enjoyed that. They really were significant, or they are a significant mark in kit car history. One of the very top tier companies for quality and customer service, and certainly with Nick's innovation and skills and engineering now, he really set a good standard for those that followed, and particularly John Hoyle, who deserves incredible gets kudos from me and most people really for not only being a really good chap, a really great chap and a really nice person to deal with, but he believed wholeheartedly in the NG cars marque and put his heart and soul into it. And anyway, wherever you are in the world, I hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode of the Total Kit Car History Files on our YouTube channel. If you could hit the like button on the way out, that would be greatly appreciated. And if you haven't already done so, and if you've got this far, there's a good chance that you might have maybe enjoyed slightly some of it, maybe, he said. If you could subscribe, it doesn't cost you a penny. And if you could go to Neil's channel, Enwin Motors, and do the same thing there, please, that would be really, really good. And if you do subscribe and you do like it, greatly helps the channel and helps us bring more of the wide variety of material that we have available to us through the Total Kit Car archive, and also thanks to 75 years of kit car history, really. So we've got plenty of topics to go at, and we're barely scratching the surface so far. So we look forward to welcoming you to the channel very soon, and thanks for visiting. Thank you.